Members of the committee, our chair lady, April Allen, is in transit and may join us by Zoom. She was hoping to be where she was going in time to be on the phone at 1 o'clock, but since she's not, I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting and thank everybody for being here, our guests and members of the committee, and it's nice to be on the 5th floor for a change. It's good, but the first order of business, as always, is approval of the minutes. They were in your package that was submitted last week. I would entertain a motion to approve or any corrections or additions.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, this time we're going to have the opportunity to get an overview that we don't get very often on this committee, and that is on the state of adult education in the state of South Carolina. I want to welcome to the podium Mr. Mike King, who's the State Adult Education Director. With the use of measures like the GED completion and the high school student success measure, we thought it was important to understand the student population that Mr. King's office serves and the work that they do. So, Mr. King, welcome. We look forward to your remarks.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Just wanted to share some information about the good work that's going on in adult education. I've included here the mission and vision statements for adult education for your reading, but for the sake of time, I want to move forward. The topics that I plan to go across today, the structure of adult education, demographic information, some outcome data, the services that are provided through local adult ed programs, some items that are being developed and future goals, funding, and some celebratory type items. I want to start with the structure of adult education. Across the 50 states and 7 territories, adult education kind of follows this pattern. There are 29 states that are similar to our current structure of adult education. Those are K-12 states. Florida is an example, South Carolina and Florida, and as far as the this area of the country is concerned. Community college states are examples of community college states would be North Carolina and Georgia. Career tech, workforce development, workforce department states would be more like Michigan and Indiana. And Department of Labor states would look more like Tennessee and Kentucky's examples. Across the state in South Carolina, there are 51 providers, 47 school district providers, 4 community-based organizations. There are 47 school district providers counting Palmetto Unified School District. But looking at the public school district programs, there are 46 of them, and with a series of mergers, they cover the state of South Carolina for adult education programs. And we basically have the whole state blanketed. Those 46 school district providers have more than 120 locations around the state of South Carolina. So we're basically everywhere, all across the state, serving South Carolina with the services that I'm going to mention later in the presentation. One other thing I want to mention while I'm talking about the structure is the fact that adult education serves individuals who are 17 to 99 years of age. And students who are 16 years of age can attend adult education. If they're under Department of Juvenile Justice, they can attend adult education and actually take the GED assessment. And then if a local school district superintendent or school board chair decides to assign an individual to adult education that's 16 years of age, those individual 16-year-olds can attend that way. Other than that, adult education programs are designed really for 17 years of age and up. sharing some demographic information since the 2018 school year through, this data goes through March 1st of this year. This data actually looks at right at about 70,000 students that have been served through these 51 adult education programs since the 2018-19 school year. And you can see the demographic breakout there. Looking at the age breakout, one of the things that we always like to highlight here is the fact that the overwhelming majority of individuals that are being served fall in the working age individuals across the state. If you look at the 25 to 44 age group, that's more than 40% of the students that are being served in adult education fall in that age group. 16 to 18 and 19 to 24 make up another 40%. So roughly more than 80% of all of the students that are being served really since the 2018-19 school year through now. And I think if you go back further in time, you'll find the same type of data. But more than 80% of the students being served are really the working age individuals across the state. And this is the educational entry demographic makeup. So since that same, across the same time period, 2018 to 2023, March 1st of 2023, 14% of the students enrolling in adult education have been at the secondary level, whereas 86% are below, or basically below ninth grade level. 86% of the students who enrolled in adult education are below ninth grade level. 14% are at the high school level. Sharing some data here, and this is the same information that the number tallies that I shared a second ago. And I know everyone here may not be a TABE expert. A test of adult basic education is the assessment that individuals take when they enroll in adult education. That assessment gives local providers information about the student, how to help that student make an educational gain or work toward the GED or even finish a high school diploma. And you can look through this data on your leisure, but it also includes information about integrated education and training, workplace literacy, which are two new areas of adult education. Adult education operates under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, signed into law 2014. And with that act, integrated education and training and workplace literacy programs were brought into the process. And so we're really, prior to COVID, the program was really getting off the ground. COVID kind of set both programs back about 2 years, but up to this point, workplace literacy, we have about 20 MOAs with employers across the state as it relates to workplace literacy. Now, these MOAs are created and really they're employer-centered. So the employer identifies with the local adult education program what the need is, and local adult ed programs help with reading, writing, math, English as a second language, digital literacy type skills. Those are the areas that local adult ed programs help employers. And so we're excited about those 20 current MOUs, and we look forward to collaborating with more employers across the state of South Carolina. Integrated education and training is a career pathway that's developed based on employment need across the state.
Mr. King, Ms. Barton had a question for you.
Can I ask you a question,
Yes.
Mr. King? I love your data, because I love data. As I'm looking at this, it looks like you're doing really well with the 17 to 21-year-old population getting a high school diploma or GED, but not as well with the 22 and over. Am I reading that correctly?
It's kind of like a tidal wave, but with this, based on this data, yes. The younger students normally do much better than the older individuals because they're not so far removed from high school. And so they still have a lot of the skills, especially like these are individuals, college and career standards have been pushed into the academics for quite a few years at this point. And so 17 to 21-year-olds coming over should have a lot of skills that they bring with them, and it should make an easy path through adult education for them. Any other questions concerning that data? Yes.
Do you have level, I'm assuming that you have levels. You've got a good success there with the younger people completing. What is considered completion to whatever level? I mean, you've got the older people. I mean, how far are they going? I don't really know how to frame that question, except there's got to be certain levels of achievement there.
I can explain that. So remember, the TABE assessment, Test of Adult Basic Education, is administered to all incoming students.
Right.
And that TABE assessment designates educational functional level for that particular student. And then the program gathers a remediation process for that individual student. All of this is totally individualized. And so students coming in lower than ninth grade level, which means, well, let me back up and say this. So there are 6 levels of national student reporting NRS students, 6 levels, sorry. Those 6 levels, basically, so level 1 would really be like someone that's really operating, if you look at the K-12 side of things, it's someone anywhere from kindergarten to 2nd grade. And then if you look at level 2, that's anywhere between 3rd grade up to 4th grade. Level 3 would be anywhere from 5th grade to about 6th grade. And then there's level 4, would be the higher middle school levels. And then level 5 and 6 are considered adult secondary education. If you look at that, so if you're looking at the chart on the screen, adult basic education would be TABE levels 1 through 4. And the adult secondary education group would be TABE levels 5 and 6. So 5 and 6 would essentially be 9th grade through 12th grade. And so if an individual comes in, and that's the misconception that a lot of people have, like some people can come over to adult education and just finish out quickly, whereas others it may take them some time. If an individual comes over to adult ed and they're operating at TABE level 1 or 2, that means this individual is not operating that well when it comes to math or reading. They may not be able to read. So if you look at it in the same, I know we're talking adults here, but it's no different. The foundational skills have to be developed for adults just like for a child that's in 1st grade or 2nd grade. So it may take that individual some time. I attended a graduation last week, and the individual that received a GED that particular night had been in the adult ed program for 8 years. It took them some time to go through the process. So, and then you may have some that come in at maybe TABE level 4 or 5. Within a month's time, they may be out of the program with the GED in hand. So that's the misconception. A lot of people think that you can just stop by the adult ed program and pick up a GED, like they're giving them out on the corner, so to speak. But that's not the case. I mean, if the individual is operating at a higher level, sure, they can, matter of weeks or month or so, they can be done with the GED. But if that individual comes in under 9th grade level, maybe a level 2 or 3, it may take them some time, months, maybe even a few years.
I'm assuming that reading would be one of the biggest handicaps or hardships to overcome. Is that correct?
Yeah, if they're not reading and comprehending, then everything else is
Yes.
impacted.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. King, just
Yes.
so that I make sure I'm clear on this and point for the committee is that these are not folks that start, these are just reporting out completers, right? So for that participation rate, it would look like that the 22-plus crowd are more likely to go the GED route than the high school diploma route. But just because this isn't completion, this is not reflective of all the people who showed up to a GED class, just
That's right.
those who complete.
That's correct.
That took me a long time to get out, but I just wanted to make sure I was saying that right.
All right. Any other questions there? All right, so these are the services that are really the main core services that are provided. Was there a question?
I think our chair is here, so you may have to mute her, Matt.
Okay. Okay. Of course, the school district programs offer high school diploma, and that high school diploma is offered to anyone that's 17 to 99 years of age. If you saw on the previous data, if you look at high school diploma awards, I mean, since the 2018 school year, 503 adults, 22 and above actually earn a traditional high school diploma through adult education programs, whereas almost 6,000 earn a GED. So high school diplomas are awarded for individuals above age 21 in local adult ed programs. Career readiness process, we're a career readiness, we're a WIN state. We just finished off the WIN contract with Department of Employment and Workforce. And so that will be actually training. What the curriculum is occurring, it will be occurring the week of the 19th. So that process will be starting again after it's been on hold for more than a year at this point. Digital literacy is a new training service for adult education, and digital literacy will be a part of that WIN package that we have access to now. Everyone in the state of South Carolina can take the WIN assessment for free, just like the high school juniors can. English as a second language. Skills upgrade classes include individuals who may have already finished high school. They may have some college. That may be someone who's interested in changing careers. They've been in manufacturing for 20 years and now they've decided that they want to be a bookkeeper. And so they're coming into adult education to get some skills upgrade classes in math. And so we have students that fit that bill. We have a lot of students that fit that bill. Then ASVAB, someone that's interested in going to the military that want to qualify or want to hit a certain score. We offer ASVAB services so that individuals can improve their scores, or for active military folk who want to qualify for better employment in the military. We have programs that offer the ASVAB assistance as well. And then, of course, AccuPlacer. We try to stress to individuals that are graduating or leaving adult education with a high school diploma or GED that when they take the AccuPlacer, if it appears as though they're going to wind up in developmental studies, we kind of encourage them to come back and continue working adult education. But we have that service. A lot of people don't take advantage of it that I think should take advantage of it, but we have that service also in adult education. Question? Career readiness, that's the WIN, like the state just finalized the WIN contract. Department of Employment and Workforce has control of that contract. And anyone in the state of South Carolina can take the WIN career assessment for free. It's all paid for. They can take remediation, they will be able to take remediation classes through local adult ed programs if they take the assessment and want to improve on their score. It is. You remember the 11th graders in high schools, they take the career readiness. This is the same thing, yes.
Russell Booker has his hand raised on Zoom.
Mr. Booker has a question on Zoom.
Appreciate that. My quick question. the data that you've been sharing, I noticed it's 18 through 23, 2018 through 23. I know with the class of 20, 21, 22, I'm looking forward to seeing the class of 2023 data. We saw some significant drops in our graduation rates with our kids in poverty. If you were breaking that data out by year, how are we looking in terms of enrollments for the students in those classes? Class of 2020, of course, was the first class that went home during the pandemic. So are y'all breaking it out that way, and are these students coming back?
We have looked at data that way, and I could have broken it out that way, but for sake of time, I kind of tried to condense it all. But yeah, 21, 22 school years, really over the last few years, those were historical low years for us. Remember, adult education is a totally volunteer program. Nobody's mandated to come over to adult education. So if individuals have to make the choice between employment or taking care of a child care or something like that, or remember there was a lot of illness throughout the pandemic with elderly individuals. A lot of adult ed program students had to leave in order to take care of someone else in their family. So certainly our attendance was way down.
But just curious in terms of enrollment for, those 17, 18, 19-year-olds who were part of those classes, are you seeing upticks in enrollment now? Just in my work here, I'm trying to figure out how do we go back, capture those students, get them into an adult ed program so we can get them finished. And I was just curious how the state numbers were tracking in terms of enrollment.
Yeah, both categories were down across those 2 school years, but both categories are definitely up. We've already gone across 20,000 served so far this current school year. So both categories are definitely up.
And Mr. King, one of the statements you made when I went to the Department of Ed that I thought was really fascinating to me is that throughout the pandemic, over the last decade, our graduation rate in the state has continued to go up. Until I asked the question, will there come a time when we might not need adult ed anymore because we're graduating everybody? And one of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting is that South Carolina is an in-migration state, and a lot of those folks who are moving in-state are also in need of our adult education services, which was something that I know on the K-12 side I had no clue about until you told me that.
Yeah, exactly. I think last school year, I don't have that number in front of me, but I think we were nearly 7,000 17 to 21-year-olds served. Out of that 7,000 figure, about 1,500 of those students had come from other states into South Carolina. And so if you look at it this way, if they're coming in, a lot of times families take on patterns. If the student themselves decided to not finish school, then maybe a parent or two may not have finished school. So those individual families coming into South Carolina creates the nearly 500,000 individuals that we have in the state now that are 18 and above, no high school credential, they're in that pot of individual people. Did I answer that question, Matthew? Okay. Any other questions there?
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm assuming that these services are free of charge.
The majority of them are free of charge. Now, we do have a handful of programs that actually charge a registration fee, but the registration fee is, the largest registration fee I've seen is about $75. But that's a part of our job at the Department of Education, Office of Adult Education, to make sure that programs aren't creating barriers to education by having such a high registration fee. And for the most part, everybody's in line with that.
I see, and that was going to be my follow-up question as to what you see are the barriers. And you've mentioned some of those things already, but do you see any other barriers to getting these services to the right individuals?
There are plenty of barriers. Transportation is huge. And you're talking Jasper County, Hampton County, Allendale, all those counties, Williamsburg, where transportation is a big issue there. Childcare is another. We partner with DSS to do as much as we can they have childcare vouchers there to do as much as we can to alleviate that barrier to education. But there are still individuals that are caring for a ailing family member or something like that. So there are all types of reasons why individuals don't come over to adult education. We have very flexible schedules in adult education. There are morning, afternoon, and evening classes for the most part around the state. And thanks to COVID, we've increased our virtual footprint. So all of the programs have access to virtual capabilities of serving students. So for individuals that are not able to come over to the program, there's a virtual component that they can take, I guess they can kind of enroll. But, with virtually, the individual has to be at a certain educational functional level to be successful virtually. So, but the opportunity is there.
Representative Alexander.
What is the youngest a person can attend or enroll in the adult ed? What's the youngest age?
That they can enroll in themselves is 17, but they still have to have like a guardian sign off at age 17. A 16-year-old can attend if they're part of the juvenile justice system or if they're written in by a school board or a superintendent, school board chair or superintendent. A 16-year-old can attend. No one is allowed under 16.
Okay, so 16 is the youngest.
16 is the youngest.
Thank you. Quick question. When you went back to the demographic breakdown, I was kind of surprised how large the Latino percentage of that breakdown of the people using this adult literacy was. I'm assuming it's even probably a larger percentage of their eligible population than even the African-American population, just by the numbers that were there. And I see English as second language. Is a lot of that how many students do you have in there that are just in there to learn how to speak English?
I think up this year, we're approaching 4,000.
Wow.
Of that number that I gave earlier. But that demographic breakout included these English as a second language students. Mm-hmm. So that, for the most part, that's where you would find Hispanic speaking, non-English speaking individuals.
Do you see them looking to get a GED, or do you see them just learning how to speak English?
The younger ones, yes.
Yeah.
The older individuals, not so much. Some of them may trickle in, but for the most part, just about all of the younger ones are wanting to learn how to speak English and working toward a GED at the same time.
Thank you.
All right, so items being developed and some of the future items that we're working on. So high school diploma program, for individuals in Department of Corrections, Palmetto Unified School District, we're definitely getting that process off the ground and it moving forward. Before, that was strictly a GED program, but now high school diploma will be added to that. Career pathways, we're working to develop career pathways for inmates. And all of these career pathways, these integrated education and training career pathways are based on the employment need for the state of South Carolina. We're not just creating career pathways for just anything. It's definitely a need area in the state. College and career navigators. Coming into this current school year, the Office of Adult Education was afforded $1.5 million from the state, so we were able to add on more college and career navigators. And their specific task is to help individuals transitioning into employment, post-secondary education, or the military. That's their specific task, their duty. I mentioned integrated education and training, and also mentioned workplace literacy. We're working with The CTE program, we're trying to expand our efforts partnering with the CTE program. Many of the IET career pathways that I mentioned are with the technical colleges across the state. Many of those are with them. And we're also trying to expand our efforts with literacy groups in the state as well. Funding, this is the funding breakdown that we have. We receive state EIA funds and general funds. Just over 16 million in EIA funds and just over 500,000 in general funds. Federally, we received just over 10 million from the federal government. 17.5 of that is spent internally on leadership, and 82.5% is a mandatory flow through to districts. We provide 4 different grants through the Office of Adult Education. Of course, adult education is one grant, corrections education, family literacy, and integrated English literacy and civics grant. Some celebratory items that I kind of wanted to conclude on. For the first time since we've been operating under WIOA, the adult education across the state of South Carolina met all outcome measures. We've never been able to say that in the adult ed world in South Carolina, but employment rate in the second quarter after exit and the fourth quarter after exit, median earnings in the second quarter after exit, and the credential rate during the program year, the attainment of a credential during the program year or 1 year after, we met all of those outcome measures, and we're on course to do the same thing this current school year. So definitely pleased with the progress that's being made across the field of adult education in the state. I think we have some pretty good programs that are really covering the state, and we look forward to expanding more. That's all I have. Any questions?
Mr. King, I just want to thank you. This is probably the best data that I've seen coming out of adult ed in a long time in the state. So I really want to thank you for that, because that really helped to shape. There's legislation pending, as you know, that the speakers put in about looking at what we're going to do for the future for adult ed. And I'm not here to persuade my colleagues, but I think there's a real opportunity to reformulate what we do in adult ed by keeping the young adult ed through the department and the local school districts, but thinking about the 22 and over, maybe more a GED and a technical college getting an industry certification. I was at SREB this week and this weekend, and they were talking about what they're doing in Georgia with that because of, and Bob can talk about this with people that are older, the relevancy of earning a GED when you've got a career that you're working towards. They're finding great success in Georgia with that. But I see the K-12 system having a really strong connection with those young kids coming out there that you're doing so well with, the ESOL. And earning, if you want to earn a high school diploma, you need to come to the adult ed at the school. But I think it gives us an opportunity to think differently going forward. As you mentioned, 500,000 adults that we can't get them employed in the jobs that we've got because they don't have the skill sets, the reading, the math, or an industry certification. So I think there's a way to do both, what the speaker wants to do and what the K-12 system wants to do. Because I know adult ed is near and dear to a lot of districts' hearts. That's what they've done for so long. But I think there's enough challenge in our state that it produces an opportunity for us to really think differently with certain subsections of our population. But the data, thank you. I really appreciate it.
And I have a follow-up question on that. And she mentioned industry certification. Is any of that counted in your numbers?
Yes.
It is? Okay. Thank you.
To follow up with Ms. Barton, are we looking at legislation to kind of shift some adult ed to the technical system? Is that the entire adult ed or just that adult age that you were referencing, 22 and above, and K-12 stays with the district?
It's up for a study, the way the speaker's bill, and I'm just saying, I think there's an opportunity to do both.
Yeah, it's a good
I think I think you're serving, especially that 17 to 21-year-old group.
Yeah. That's a different,
your data.
different concept, mindset.
It's a different concept. Your data show that you're working. Those navigators, it shows that you're making a difference in those kids' lives. I just think for some of our older adults, the relevancy and getting and working on a career industry certification, working towards it while you're working towards a GED, I totally agree, a high school diploma. If you want a high school diploma, adult ed's where you go. But if there's an opportunity to do GED with an industry credential, that's what they're doing in Georgia, with their prisons population as well, they're coming out better prepared and they're ready for the next job. But I think we can do it both. It's not an either or. We can do both.
Yeah, I think we can do both too, and I think we're currently doing both with the current way that we're set up. With the IET process, the IET is designed where individual passes at a minimum 2 sections of the GED while they're working toward an occupational certification at the same time. So that's the way that program is designed. I mean, someone could be finished with the GED and go into an IET, but it's designed at a minimum to have an individual who has passed at least 2 sections of the GED or at least 20 units as toward the traditional high school diploma to be a part of the IET at the same time. All of it can be done at the same time in our current process.
Thank you, Mr. King. Great information. We really enjoyed that. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Madam Chair, it's up to you.
April, you're on the line.
Okay, well, moving right along. It's time for subcommittee reports. This is our most exciting time of any meeting.
Absolutely.
And I want to turn it over to Barbara Harefield, who will give us a report on the joint academic standards and assessments and the public awareness meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. She doesn't, okay. The Academic Standards and Assessment Subcommittee met jointly with Public Awareness on May 15th. From that meeting, we have 3 action items and 1 information item that we are bringing to the full committee today. First, we have receive the report on the educational credit for exceptional needs children, or the SCENC program, an annual report that requires the EOC to document the impact of the program on student achievement. Dr. Jenny May walked us through information on the approval process, participation, and compliance for SCENC schools, information about the process for collecting assessment results used to document the impact of SCENC program on student success, and updates to previous recommendations from the EOC report. To summarize, in fiscal year 2021-22, a total of $4,961,300 was distributed to SCENC scholarship funds. 114 schools were determined to be eligible. Of those, 93 schools received funding. 1,365 SCENC scholarships were distributed. In evaluating the impact of the SCENC program on student achievement and academic growth, there are challenges due to a lack of student-level data. SCENC schools are not required to provide individual student test scores for students who received an SCENC grant. Compliance is monitored by receipt of aggregate scores from approved schools and information about what assessments are given to all students in the school. So, the 2 recommendations from this report were to 1, offer summative state assessments to the SCENC students, and 2, monitor policy and legislation that shape the SCENC program. This particular report was approved by subcommittee, and we'll wait till the end of all 3 to ask the full committee for approval. The second subcommittee report received was a report on educational performance of military-connected students. Based on the data from Power School, there were 13,122 public school students connected to active duty personnel in school year 2021-22. As in previous reports, the performance of military-connected students in school year 21-22 exceeded the performance of non-military connected students on each measure. Attendance and graduate rates were also higher for military-connected students. We will note that the data for end-of-course tests was not available when the subcommittee received this report. Since that time, the EOC has run these data, and the trend of military-connected students outperforming non-military connected students does not hold up with end-of-course data. In 6 of the 10 end-of-course tests, the percent of military-connected students passing the test was lower than the percent of non-military connected students, which was interesting. Non-standardized collection and coding are a continuing challenge. Roughly a quarter of military-connected students were enrolled in Richland 2 in year 21-22. Over half the students, 52%, attended either Richland 2, Dorchester 2, or Beaufort County schools. 25 school districts report no military-connected students, despite the fact that ESSA requirement to report up from 15 last year. This report was approved by the subcommittee. Neither of these first reports require a second, but they do require a vote of approval from the full committee. Now, the final report that came to the subcommittee as a report for action was from Dr. Christine DeStefano on the U.S. History and Constitution end-of-course evaluation. The decision to approve the report was carried over by the subcommittee since there were a number of open questions about the test items. Since May 15th, the EOC, Dr. DeStefano, and staff at the South Carolina Department of Ed have met to answer those questions. So Dr. DeStefano has prepared a follow-up to the open items, and she is going to present to us this morning on that. And then we will ask for a second, and after the second, then we will be able to open the floor for questions to Dr. DeStefano, or we are fortunate to have our Deputy Superintendent and Chief Academic Officer from the Department of Ed, who can also explain a lot of that to us this morning. So, Dr. DeStefano, we're pleased to have you with us this morning. Yes, Representative Alexander.
May I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
So when will we be able to ask questions about any of these items? Because I think I was reading something this weekend referencing the exceptional needs children about adding some type of an assessment. Wasn't that included?
You want to ask that now?
Can I
Yeah,
do that now?
sure,
Yeah,
of
that's what
course.
I'm asking now.
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't there some recommendation or something I saw in the documents about assessing some of these kids so we can know, what we need to do? Even though I don't like assessments, but I think that we need some type of data
Yes, sir.
to
So
determine where we are.
that has been one of the recommendations that I think we're on 3 years now. That has been a recommendation from the SCENC report to allow students in that program to be able to take state summative assessments. And that really is a way for us to be able to more accurately determine if those students are essentially how the program is doing. Because right now they take all sorts of different assessments and there's no way to equate them.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent on us to tell you whether those students are doing well in the program, and we can't very accurately do that right now.
So where are we precisely with this assessment question to these individuals, to these students?
So currently, we can't judge whether, we don't have a good idea how those
So
students
we
are
don't,
doing.
so that assessment, I guess,
Because there is no common assessment for
there's no
those
common
students.
assessment, okay.
The recommendation was just to offer it to them.
Right, to
Can it-
allow them to
Can
be
it
able-
require them to take the assessment instead of allowing them to take whatever assessment?
Yeah, as Ms. Barton says, it would take
Would
legislation.
take legislation.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's the question I wanted to ask the department is, do they have enough items to keep the security of the test? You know what I'm saying, Matt?
So I will add that when the ECENC recommendation to provide students the opportunity to take SC Ready was there, it was the department's position that SC Ready could only be given to K-12 public school students. I am not sure that that interpretation of that legislation accurately reflects what the law actually says, and that is something we are taking another look at to see if there is an opportunity to provide the opportunity for more students to be able to take that assessment. But it would not require students in the ECENC to take those assessments. That would require a change in legislation.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Representative Alexander? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that these students getting what they need.
Sure.
And the only way we can do that is by assessing them. And I don't know how we're going to do that. I guess we may have to come up with some legislation, but I think it's important. And mind you again, I'm not a proponent of over-assessing our students. But at some point in time, I think we need some type of tool to measure their progress.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we have Dr. DeStefano? Okay, we're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm here to review the U.S. History, Constitution, and of course evaluation. As was mentioned, I did present this to the subcommittee, and there were some additional questions. So I'm going to concentrate on mostly the additional questions, but just for some background, the U.S. History and Constitution test is part of the requirements for a high school diploma in South Carolina. And this review has come into play because in 2019, there were new standards adopted. So with the adoption of new standards, the U.S. History and Constitution end of course test was revised to align to those. So the goal of this is to ensure that the test produces reliable and valid information for use for evaluation of student progress, as well as for other purposes that the test is used. The review was conducted in accordance with the peer review elements. So just briefly, I'm going to go through, there are 6 areas, and I'm going to just run through these briefly and concentrate on anything in red was a question that has come up, so I wanted to pay more attention to those. In general, for these 3 areas, in terms of the statewide system of standards and assessments, the system's operations, and the technical quality, the test performed well. There was information on the website related to the program. It's clear and easy to follow. And in terms of the technical validity, the test items were constructed according to standards. The large majority of the items met psychometric criteria. There were 2 items that did not, and the recommendation was to review these 2 items in future administrations. Some follow-up communication with DRC and DRC is the testing company that is in charge of the analyses for this, this testing program, mentioned that the items are constantly under review every year. So those two items will be reviewed in future administrations. The other three areas, technical quality, other, inclusion of students, and standards and reporting, all were in line with the peer review elements. The last element of standards and reporting, a recommendation was to review the impact estimates that are associated with the cut score, given that this this was a field test and did not count, and that is something that is planned for a later date. Getting to some of the questions that came up from last time, there was a question, given that this is a new, there are new standards and there's a pool of items that's used to create the test, there's a question of how many items on the test and in the pool are from the older standards. And so is this new test appropriate for the revised standards? And so you can see here, this is information from DRC as well as conversations with the State Department. There are currently 472 items that were banked specifically for these new standards. And I want to, if you can, I don't know where my cursor is, or if I can point with this, but let me, if you take a look at this table on the left, the 2019 standards, you can see how many items have been developed each year and that there are items that are currently being field tested as well as projected items. If you take a look at this, the second table on the right, the operational form that I reviewed here has 55 items total. So if you look at the number of items written for the older standards, there were some items written for the older standards, and that's roughly 24 or half the test, right? And there were new items, roughly half the test, that was constructed specifically to the 2019 standards. There were a lot of field test items, so you can see in 2023, the operational form significantly reduces the number of items that were written for the older standards. There are only two where 53 items will be written specifically for these newer standards. Another question was, given that the standards have changed and these are now more rigorous, can we ensure that the items that are included on the test, the newly constructed as well as the older items, are at higher levels of the DOK, or the degrees of knowledge? And so the issue here was, are these items more rigorous, the ones that are included? And the items go through a rigorous review in terms of all these areas: content alignment, rigor, technical design, universal design, and fairness. So any item that is newly constructed or an older item has to meet all these benchmarks to be included. And then one last question was, what documentation shows that the items in the revised test are aligned to the newer standards? So can we be sure that any items that were from the older pool match these new, more rigorous standards? And these were conducted through alignment meetings that were held in 2020 to review all of the items from the original pool. And the goal was to see specifically that, were there any items that we could use from this older pool in this newer administration. And so each item was discussed, and you'll see of the items in the pool, so 545 items were discussed, and roughly 32% of the pool was thrown out. There were 373 items that remained that were aligned. And as noted above, these items are available for use and then go into the broader pool. And then just the last point too, the number of items included on future forms will continue to decrease as more items go through the field testing process. So in general, just as an overall summary, this test is a well-constructed test to use as part of the end-of-course evaluation programs, and there were minor recommendations that were made in the evaluation to enhance the test. But overall, the test and the resources evaluated from the spring 2022 field test showed that it was appropriate, demonstrates psychometric soundness, and includes a variety of evidence to support the use of scores. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
And Dr. DeStefano, this may be more of a question for Mr. Ferguson on this, but the teacher task force on recruitment and retention came out recently with its
Yes.
results and recommendations. And one of those recommendations was more information for teachers on how well their students did or how well the state students did on standards. And this may be more for Matthew, but with this new test going out, is there an emphasis to get more information to teachers on what standards we're doing well on teaching, especially to the classroom level? I think that's a real important focus for teachers right now.
Melanie, that is a question that I have heard a lot, and I will say that I don't have a good answer for you yet. I think that there is a summary process that happens statewide, and we talk about where and when students need to improve statewide. I think we do need to extend those conversations to school and classroom levels, but I think it's going to require, it may require how we provide that item level data back to teachers, and we are not currently doing that for EOC, and I agree we need to be.
And I hate to interrupt this discussion, but we really do need a second on the report before we can take questions. Do I have a second on? Second. Thank you. And Matthew, thank you for being here. Dr. Stefano, thank you for your report. I don't think there was ever a question about the soundness of the items, and we really appreciate your work on the psychometric report. There's just been a lot of, I think, confusion among teachers, not just with the social studies, but with the science report and the transition from not really different questions, but a different type of question with the science and the social studies. And Matthew, did you want to speak to any of that? I know you've heard a lot from us and other educators about the process.
I'm happy to do it now, or
Yeah.
Ms. Harefield, if you would like, I can also, I think many of the issues are the same when we talk about science, and I tried to include those in my presentation, so I can do it either
Okay,
time.
you want to do that?
Yes, ma'am.
When is your presentation?
A little
Okay.
later, yes, ma'am.
Does anybody have any, well, first of all, you want to approve all of these? Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Senator
As usual.
Loftus.
You're talking about the changes in the standards. Can you give me an example of the difference in changing the old standards to the new standards, to the different standards?
Yes, sir. So a couple examples would be, science is the easiest for me to think about. So for example, in fourth grade, it may have once been earth science, and so instead of earth science, it may change to biology. Or in social studies, we may have used to teach U.S. history in seventh grade, and with the new standards, we now teach world geography in seventh grade. And so it's a shift in the content. And when you have great shifts in content is often where you need the ability to field test items because the overlap is not there.
How does it affect, or how does it affect the actual subject matter? We
With
talked
the-
about testing and rigor and all that. I understand that.
Yes, sir. With the science, it's going to drastically change how science is taught across the state.
And STEM.
And yes, sir. And at what point in a child's matriculation they are exposed to a particular area of content.
But in this particular, for the end of course U.S. history, the content is not changing. No, the content is not changing. Just the application, some of the skills that they're being asked, in the way they're being asked to answer some of the questions is changing. The rigor's a little higher. So, and I don't know, April has no auditory.
She has no audio.
Okay, so we need a motion to approve all three subcommittee reports.
So moved.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, we have one information item for an update on. And I'm sorry. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carried. Finally, we have an information item for an update on an item from the subcommittee discussed related to the revisions on the modified in-year reporting for the high school achievement test. Some of the details have changed slightly, so Dr. Lavery will walk members through that. Also, the agenda notes, there's a revision to the ACT College Readiness Score. That revision has not been made by ACT, so there is no need, okay. So there's no need to receive that information. Dr. Lavery.
Good afternoon. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the background behind this change. And for those of you that were at the subcommittee meeting, a lot of this early material is a repeat for you. But when I talk about what has changed in how we're revising our approach to high school testing, the change we're making doesn't make any sense unless you know what we suggested in the first place, right? So the way it currently works under our federally approved consolidated state plan for accountability is that EOC EP scores are banked. So if a student takes Algebra 1 in their 9th grade year and they take the Algebra 1 EOC, that score is sort of held until that student is part of the graduating cohort, so 4 years later. And this was done for a number of reasons. The pro is that it guarantees that each and every student gets counted, right? Because when the graduating cohort has to have all of the students in it, and so if you're counting by the graduating cohort, then you know for certain that all of the students are getting counted. And the 95% test participation rate is captured by the graduating cohort. Unfortunately, what this also does, though, is it has some, Zoom is messing me up again. It has some cons. So using this approach means that scores are years old when they're finally used for accountability. And that transfers can result in high school ratings being based, at least in part, on teaching that happened somewhere else. And so it's also then very difficult to use what appears on the report cards to monitor continuous improvement efforts at high schools, since the changes you make this year at your high school may not actually show up on the report card for another 2 or 3 years. And so the reason why we had to examine these questions, though, is that the current graduating cohort is the cohort that started their high school experience in the 2019-2020 school year. And so this high school graduation cohort was perhaps the most directly impacted by pandemic interruptions for learning. And early analyses indicated that at many schools, or at some schools rather, as high as 75% of students are missing test scores because they didn't test that semester. And that's actually not a problem that is isolated just to 9GR 20. The following cohort also has a lot of missing test scores because of some of the pandemic interruptions that sort of lingered and affected the 2020-2021 school year as well. And so as a result, the sample is not very representative of the general student population at these schools. The students that have test scores are often systematically different in some way from the students that don't. And it is also possible that participation rate penalties might be applied to schools, and those penalties are not actually related to the behaviors that are meant to be penalized, right? So the federal law includes penalties for low testing rates because the goal is to encourage schools not to deny services to students, right? So if students are all being served and the test scores are missing for reasons that don't have anything to do with nefarious behaviors on the part of school leaders, then the penalties aren't really warranted, right? Like that's not what the penalties were created for. And so what we proposed, or what we considered rather, were a couple of things. The first is that we could do nothing. We could use the currently approved consolidated state plan. Meets the requirements of the law, but maybe not necessarily meeting the goals of accountability, and it's also got all those problems you saw on the previous slide. Another option that was offered was for 1 year and 1 year only to report the third year cohort, and then go back to the graduation cohort. This would skip the 9GR 20 students entirely and double count the 9GR 21 students. It doesn't resolve the core issues with reporting this way, and 9GR 21 also sort of has some of its own problems. Another option was to go to the third year cohort permanently. So we would skip 9GR 20 entirely. It still doesn't resolve the problem that we saw on the previous slide. And so the fourth option was modified in-year reporting for high schools. And what we had originally proposed to do is represented here, where report cards would use all EOC exams from the current academic year that were administered at your high school, and include all EOC exams for students currently at your high school that have not yet been reported for accountability. Well, this made a ton of sense and seemed like the best possible answer. And the Federal Department of Education pushed back a little bit, saying, well, you're treating a subset of the students differently. And they said that because as part of the proposal, we said students who took their EOC course such that they were going to take their test the spring of 20, they would be removed from the participation rate. And students who would have taken their EOC exam during the 2020-2021 school year who were enrolled in virtual instruction would also be removed from the participation rate. And they said, no, you don't get to treat a subgroup of students differently. And admittedly, I was a bit frustrated by that. Like, well, then what the heck am I supposed to do? I just don't know. And when I read sort of the language that they sent for us to consider, I realized, oh, actually the solution is remarkably simple. And so you'll see that this slide looks very similar to the slide you saw before. Let me point out the important difference. Report cards will use all EOC EP enrollments from the current school year, and all EOC EP enrollments from any student who's currently in their first year in high school who took the EOC course in middle school. Now, the difference here is focusing on enrollments, not on tests. So one of the things that appeared to be true from the feedback we got on the original proposal is that the Federal Department of Ed really likes it when the current accountability system can operate independently of previous years, right? So you don't have to adjust anything that happens this year based on what has happened in previous years. And what we had proposed sort of required that. But by focusing on enrollments, students who were enrolled in an EOC required course in the 1920 school year were taken care of by that system then. Students who were enrolled in an EOC course in the 2020-2021 school year were taken care of by that system then. And so by using this system, enrollments are determined. Enrollment means that a student takes a course that requires an EOC. For current year tests, that test is going to be accredited to whichever school the student is enrolled in on the first day of testing. For students who took that course in middle school, that test will be applied to whichever school they're enrolled in on the 180th day of the school year. So whichever high school they end up in at the end of that first year. And last but not least, the participation rate is all of the test scores that we have divided by the number of enrollments from the current year, the number of enrollments, plus the number of enrollments from students in their first year of high school who were enrolled in middle school, plus, and this is how we catch up with all of the students, everyone in the graduation cohort who has never been enrolled in one of these courses. By focusing on enrollments instead of tests, the same proposal completely resolves the problem. And so this is the change that we're currently proposing to the Federal Department of Education. And I am even more confident in their approval of this language since they essentially gave it to us.
Yeah, and I don't even know what the question is, Taylor. There's a lot of stuff given to us, and it kind of went over my head. I know I'm not the brightest bulb in the light, but there gotta be a much more simpler way. No offense to you, Doc, but gotta be a much more simpler way of how we manage this whole testing thing for our students. I heard him, and I heard you the other day, and I understood it clearer the other day than I did today. And I don't even. Huh?
Federal government got involved.
Oh, I don't know what questions to ask, but I'm confused. Maybe some questions, but
Ms. Barton?
I think that the key for the U.S. Department of Ed is making sure all students count. I think that's where they are. It's making sure, because, and I hate to say this, but you have to put on a psychologist hat to think about how the consequence. Someone once told me the behavior, the accountability sets up a behavior. So I think the behavior that we're trying to get is all students have to take Algebra 1 to graduate. Mm-hmm. So by using enrollments, we're making sure all students are counted rather than that test, which you could have been absent on or taken an F on, a 0, and you still could have passed the course because your other grades could have been as good. But I think that's, if I'm saying it correctly, it's to make
Absolutely.
sure every student gets counted in the whole system, and we make sure how all our students are doing.
And legitimately, I think the reason why when we made the original proposal, we were focused on tests, is precisely because of this notion that all students need to count. And if we have test scores that haven't been reported yet, and we skip over them, then aren't we skipping over all the students in those school years? And that was not the case, because by focusing on enrollments, all students are being counted. And it makes sense, right? Like, you're not going to report the test scores of students who took their test in spring of 20 because nobody took their test in spring of 20, right? Like, 20 took care of itself, and by focusing on enrollments, all students are counted.
I think to Ms. Barton's point too of driving behavior, the move to report what happened this year in the school allows those principals in those schools to make better decisions for next year instead of, because what we heard high school principals say sometimes is, well, Mr. Johnson was the principal when those tests were given 4 years ago. What I do is not going to show up on a report card for 4 more years. And so this move makes it more real-time reflective of what happened this year so that we know parents can make good choices, teachers can make good choices, and you can change behavior next year.
Well, my thinking is just me, when you consider kids coming not from district to district, are leaving from district to district, but what about those kids that will not be counted who are coming from another state into our system who have not been tested, that they're going to be counted? Well, it sounds like a little manipulation. I don't know. How are we going to manage all of that? And I guess that's my concern. You got kids coming from different states who may not take those tests.
They don't come in.
They don't count.
No,
And those kids who are leaving our system, but you've already counted them at the beginning of the year, according to his report.
those kids who are there at the beginning of the year, they would be counted if there was not a test, but if they legitimately transferred out and a school picked them up, I don't know what happens to them in the other state, but if the transfer happens as it should, they wouldn't count either.
Thank you, Dr. Lavery, for always thinking, always being the smartest mathematical brain in the room. All right, Neil.
Okay, we now turn it over to Dr. Bob Couch, who will give us a report on the EIA and Improvement Mechanism Subcommittee meeting. Dr. Couch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. The EIA Improvement Mechanism Subcommittee, we met on May the 15th. The primary purpose of the meeting was to receive the annual report on the South Carolina Teacher Loan Program. Authorized by the General Assembly as part of the Education Improvement Act of 1984, the program is now nearly 40 years old. In exchange for teaching in academic and/or geographic areas of critical need, the program makes 3 types of forgivable loans. And these are available to the talented and qualified state residents as a financial incentive to enter the teaching profession. Type 1, funded through the EIA, is for traditional educator preparation program students and are in large majority of the loan recipients. Type 2, funded through the general fund for career changers. And third type, also funded through the general fund, is the department's PACE Alternative Preparation Program. Sally Cawthon, who is in the audience today and did a great job, is the author of the report, discussed governance issues as well as data related to the program. The data were reviewed generally supported the value of the program on the teacher pipeline. Through the number of applications and recipients were down significantly, though, with a 12-year low at applicants overall. The number of all Type 1 applicants has dropped 30.6% since FY 1920. And the teacher cadet applicants has dropped 33.7%. Teacher cadet applicants and recipients have been core to the program. However, after increasing steadily for 5 years, their portion of all applicants dropped. 83% of the applicants attended one of the 11 teaching fellow institutions, inferring a positive link to those programs. The number of subject areas designated as critical needs, which drives the loan forgiveness, has expanded significantly since the program inception, with math and science were the early designations. For FY 23-24, the State Board has identified 30 subject areas as critical needs, up from 25 for FY 21-22. The committee discussed the short-term and long-term recommendations and strategies that came from the report. A few short-term recommendations of note include focus on marketing the program as a debt avoidance tool for all 3 loan applicant types. Reach out to the 144 program applicants that were denied a forgivable loan FY 17-18 through FY 19-20 due to inadequate funds after use of revolving loan funds resumed. Leverage and incorporate relative findings and recommendations from the just-released Governor's Task Force on Teacher Recruitment and Retention Report. A few long-term recommendations of note include initiate a comprehensive approach to restructure, streamline, and rejuvenate the program for all 3 loan types and rebrand it as a debt avoidance tool versus, quote, loan, end of quote, which has a negative connotation. Establish specific, targeted, measurable, and attainable goals based on reliable and consistent input from surveys from all the constituencies and partners, including local and charter districts, with more disaggregated data pursuant to career goals. Increase focus on the teacher cadet and teaching fellows pipeline. Establish the means to collect, coordinate, and track teacher cadet, teaching fellows, and TLP longitudinal information. After the question and answer and discussion period, the report was approved unanimously by all of the subcommittee members participating in the meeting. Mr. Chairman, I move this report to the full committee for action.
This comes from the committee with the committee's recommendation,
Yes.
correct? So it does
Correct.
not require a second. I'll open it up for discussion. Any comments? If not, then I'd ask for a vote of approval. All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
The information item relative to the payment of gold and silver. Dr. Knight is not here, right? No. Yeah. The criteria for the payment of gold and silver award for closing the achievement gap used last for the 2014 school report cards was based on exceptional performance or exceptional growth in performance in a school by at least one of the targeted historically underachieving groups of students on the state accountability tests, and at that time it was PASS, for elementary and middle schools and in the graduation rate for high schools. The EOC staff is taking the opportunity to review the most recent school data, consider the options for awarding closing the achievement gap for elementary, middle, and high schools. Given the new metrics being added to the accountability model, the EOC staff recommends an analysis of these data before any recommendation or recommendations are made for this award. The EOC staff would also recommend that the state consider identifying schools that are closing the achievement gap for all subgroups of students based on progress of the schools toward Every Student Succeeds Act goals of the state. The EOC plans to convene educators to review and provide feedback to the closing achievement gap recommendations. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my report. That was an informational item.
Thank you, Dr. Couch. Dr. Ferguson, it's your test to give your report on the past science field test accountability waiver. Look forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Y'all look a long way down there when you're standing on this side. So I am here today to request and talk about a waiver that the Department of Ed is requesting as it relates to science in grades 4th and 6th grade. One small tweak, just so that you know, and I've got to train myself to start doing it, is that for years we have called the science assessment the SC Pass assessment. As of the new contract, it is all SC Ready. So it's SC Ready ELA, SC Ready Math, SC Ready Science. And what our waiver is requesting is for 1 year in general and for the alternative science assessment, just in grades 4 and 6, a waiver and accountability to allow the Department of Ed to conduct a field test. And we're also seeking a waiver from the Federal Department of Ed, and these are the specific statutory requirements under ESSA that we are looking to have waived. And the reason for that change kind of goes to some of the discussion that we had earlier. So when we started down this road, I think that the science standards were the very first thing that happened when I was at the EOC. It was the very first set of standards that were passed when I was executive director. And we knew then, when we were passing those standards, that the content shifted drastically with the adoption of these new science standards. And so when we look at 4th grade science, for example, 75% of the content in grade 4 is new. Some of the content that used to be taught in 8th grade is moving to 6th grade. Some of that's moving to 4th grade. Some of the content that was in 7th grade is switching to 4th grade. Some of the content matter that we taught in 4th grade is now switching to 6th or 7th grade. And so the actual content, 75% of it in grade 4 is new. When you look at the performance indicators, only 4 of them overlap between the old standards and the new standards. Very similar case in grade 6. So there are 5 PEs that overlap. One's loosely aligned, and then the rest are completely out, and they're being replaced with new content. And so kind of talking through the process with the U.S. history earlier, when the team met and they started looking at the item bank from what was SC Pass and what would become SC Ready Science, 97% of the items had to be thrown out. And that is why when we are looking at going forward for next year, we will be implementing the science standards in 23-24. Teachers will be teaching those new science standards. Because the test is so drastically different and the content so drastically different, we couldn't give the old test and get anything from that because the content doesn't match. And then because all of this content is new, we also were not confident that the items that we were creating would pass all that psychometric muster that Dr. DeStefano kind of walked us through earlier. We think we will get many good items out of that, but we're just not quite sure we'd get enough to be able to pass all the peer review. And when we took it to the South Carolina Technical Advisory Committee meeting in March, they recommended pretty strongly that we not try to administer the test in 24 and count it for accountability, that we needed the option to do that analysis and create an item bank that we could have a valid and reliable test going forward. But if we were constricted and tried to do all of that at one time, we would limit the number of items we could test, and we would also limit the number of items going forward that we could use to build out a robust, valid, and reliable assessment. And thinking through that, what are some of the advantages of this waiver? First, it's going to allow us to field test and develop a strong item pool going forward. It's going to allow districts and teachers adequate time to implement instruction based on these new standards because, again, these standards are drastically different than what came before. And so teachers are going to be implementing for the very first time starting next school year. And then by doing this right in year 1, we're going to have stronger assessments going forward. One thing that has come up that I think is worth mentioning is what happens for the 95% requirement that students test. that's a concern, I think, for accountability purposes, because one thing I heard was, well, if it's not going to count, then are teachers really going to make that shift and teach the new standards next year? Are they going to require students to be assessed on that new science test at the end of the year? And so that's a concern on a psychometric basis too, because to really make and get the most out of this field test, we need 95% participation. So what we would recommend is that we keep the 95% participation rule in place that's in the accountability manual, and say that if districts are not meeting 95% participation in the assessment, then their overall rating would drop by 5 points. So of those points that are available to science, half of them, or 5 points, would be 0 if they did not meet the 95% participation rate. Also of note is we're not asking for a waiver in biology, because biology content did not drastically shift in such a way that we are going to have to field test so many new items that we couldn't create a valid and reliable assessment. We are not coming and asking for a waiver for biology. We're only asking to have 4th and 6th grade science waived because the content shift was so drastic. Another question that I bet if I were sitting in your seat that would be on your minds is, well, we waived U.S. history last year. Now you're coming to us and you're asking us to waive science for a year. We have passed English and we are getting ready to consider math standards. Are we also going to have to waive those standards? And I am pleased to say that ELA is currently passed. We have those standards out. They are planned to be implemented for the first time in the 24-25 school year. And so when we look at the content of the 2015 ELA standards and compare that to the 2023 ELA standards that passed, the content is not drastically different. Where the shifts came were in the reduction in the number of standards. Remember, we worked to prioritize those, and we also worked to clarify the language within those grade level indicators to make them clear. We do not anticipate needing to waive accountability for ELA when it is implemented in the 24-25 school year. Math standards are currently out for public review. I think that closed today, actually, and we'll be meeting in a few weeks at the department with a group of teachers and that math standards writing team to consider the feedback that was given during the public comment. Where those standards currently are, who knows how they all shake out, but where they currently are, I feel like that is going to be much more similar to ELA, where we are looking to reduce the number of standards, where we are looking to clarify the language and the measurability within those standards, but it will likely not result in huge drastic shifts in content. And so, all bets are off until they're approved by the EOC, but y'all have one of the last swings at that. But if there are not many great shifts, then I don't anticipate us needing a waiver for math either. And the plan right now is for the math standards to go into effect in the 25-26 school year. So that would conclude kind of the rollout of the new standards. We've previously done social studies. This next school year, the 23-24 school year, science will be implemented and tested. The 24-25 school year, ELA will be implemented and assessed, and then the following year, the new math standards will be implemented and assessed. So that would be the 25-26 school year. One thing, too, that Ms. Harefield asked about earlier, just so you know, because I think one of the misconceptions around how these test items are created is I heard someone say, well, you just have this item bank and the computer just randomly goes in and selects a number of items and puts them on a test, and that's how the tests are created. I didn't think that was right, but I got to spend some time with Llewellyn, our new interim director of standards and assessment, and she really talked through how the department and a committee of people come together around a big table and they think very strategically and methodically about how those assessments and forms are created. And so, for example, they'll make sure that there aren't so many A's in a row, or they'll make sure that, you know, it's going from easy to hard, or you don't have too many easy in a row, and you have a mix between the easy and the hard. They also look at, for example, how best to scramble the items. So Mr. Johnson and Mr. Alexander can be taking the same test in the same room, but Mr. Johnson's A's different than Mr. Alexander's A's on the same question, or they may get questions in a different order. And so they're able to do that much more strategically, intently, also when we are able to administer those assessments virtually online. And kind of going back to a recurring theme, one of the things that I was also interested to learn is that on SC Ready and on EOC, we are now able to guarantee that districts have results back within 36 hours. So no longer are, you know, districts and schools waiting 2-3 months in order to get their results back. Within 36 hours, whether it's SC Ready or EOC, the district has those preliminary results back in place. So I tried to answer your questions, but are there any questions that I can answer for you?
Matthew, do you require the EOC's concurrence for the waiver? Is this for information, or do you require us to take action?
I don't think it requires action. I think it's just for information because it will be submitted to the feds for federal approval, and this is our one step in the process of soliciting public feedback on the plan.
It certainly makes sense to me if you have 75% new items that it needs to be field tested. So I certainly would approve a one-year waiver. But
I just want to thank you. I just want to make one comment. So 2 years ago, we sat here, I wasn't on, and approved the standards. So it took now it's going to be 3 years to actually do the test. So one of the things that I would suggest is, since the legislators are around the room, you know, if more money needs to go to the department to get these tests done quicker, or more staff, or more something, because this is a long wait. And I'm not casting stones at you personally, but I think that was one of the big concerns I always had, is we get the standards changed, and there was never a time frame, a timeline for when the test, and when the, and I think we need to get that back on track, because if you look at it, in a few years, it'll be time to change the standards again, and that system is not working well right now.
Yes, ma'am.
It's not working well for teachers either.
And I think, Ms. Barton, to that point, I think one piece that I think we should add in the process is that as standards are approved, there should be a timeline that is submitted to the Education Oversight Committee and the state board, that it could shift, it could change, but that this is what the department is committed to trying to implement. Because I think with the science particularly, there was a lot of discussion about when to implement and COVID, and, you know, when do you implement? So yes, ma'am. It's been a long time coming. Ms. Harefield.
Ms. Harefield.
Matthew, I remember one time, I think it was a representative from DRC came and spoke with a group of content coordinators. And the question that was brought up was, is there a way to get back data per indicator on some of the assessments? And they said that information, I think they said it was available, but it was not purchased by the state. Do you know anything about that by the contract? Do you
Ms.
just
Fairfield, as I
purchase the final score?
Understand it, and I'm going to look back for them to keep me honest, but as I understand it, is that to provide results back at the indicator level, it would, for all the indicators, would require a longer test. And then there are also more items that would have to be developed to be able to do that. But I'm going to look back and, Llewellyn, you want to add to that? There's some people online.
Okay, so I want to go back just briefly to the question about U.S. history and what information we do provide. For the new U.S. history test, we do provide scores per reporting category, and for U.S. history, that'll be at the standard level. So there are 5 standards, and there is information about each standard. We do not typically give out indicator level scores for exactly what Matthew said, but we do address that. There is a law that requires us to do a data review report where we bring in a group of teachers to look at item level data and make recommendations to the field for instructional purposes. So we do address that. Indicator level information would require a much longer test, and at a summative level, it's not going to really give the teachers what they want.
I mean, that's just a different interest from teachers and using it for accountability.
Right, exactly.
Okay, anyway, thank you.
I'm kind of in the box with Representative Alexander. I have a question. I'm figuring out how to ask it. This is, I believe I heard it was 1 year. This is a 1 year waiver
Yes, sir.
on this. What do we do to keep the students still instructed during that one? And I understand what you're doing. I think I do. Will they'll be tested on their progress in the classroom still, but you're waiving the reporting requirement.
Yes, sir. We are waiving holding the schools responsible and counting those scores in the report card so that we can make sure that the questions we are asking are valid and reliable psychometrically. But the teachers would be teaching next year the new standards, and at least 95%, hopefully 100%, but at least 95% of the students would be required to be assessed in that subject in grades 4 and 6.
And as I understand it, routinely we do 5-year assessments. Is that correct? Am I correct there?
For the standards revision,
Yes.
it starts in 5. It usually takes about 7 to get through the whole process. Yes, sir.
One of the things that concerns me, especially in the area of science, the standards you do today, if you got to wait 5 or 7 years to get them in there, they've changed drastically. 7 years ago, were we talking about artificial intelligence and that sort of thing? Is maybe that be more way out there example, but we're changing that fast. Is there any provision of looking, and the teachers might not be happy with it, and I'm not trying to put a burden on teachers, but the fact is, it's changing that rapidly. So my question, how do you keep up with it to make it current?
Well, I do think that unlike ELA and math, science did change drastically this time in the content and the rigor at which they are being assessed. So I think we should stay to keep looking at it, and if it needed to be adjusted before that 5-year mark, certainly bring it up. But that it is at least happening on a routine, regular basis where we're checking in to say these changes need to happen, or we concur with what's there and continue as is, which I don't ever anticipate happening with science.
And I was just talking specifically about science.
Yes, sir.
That's what I was talking about.
Anything further? Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good report. We now go down to our interim executive director update. Ms. Yao, you got something for us?
Yes, I wanted to give you all a reminder of the retreat, which will be held at the South Carolina Ports Authority August 6th and 7th. And room reservation deadline is July the 6th, so we need to book before that point. Also, right now, I think Superintendent Weaver is going to come and speak on Sunday. And Frank Rainwater is going to do a follow-up presentation on Monday, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the population trend work that they have done, which impacts the workforce, kind of alluding back to what we were talking about today with adult ed. There's a shrinking workforce in a lot of areas, and that's what he's seen. He said he's also going to talk a little bit about the budget for next year and what he sees. As well as hopefully have a preview of the dashboard that they have. And then you'll also hear from EOC staff and look at some of the dashboard work that we're doing, and also an update on the strategic plan. So that's my update. And thank you, Neil, for pinch hitting for chair with no prep at all. April says thank you, by the way.
I do want to call an executive session to discuss a personnel matter related to our search for a new executive director of the EOC. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session. Is there a second? All in favor? All right, we stand in executive session. I'd ask everyone to leave the room with exception of EOC members. And Matthew, you're welcome to stay as Ms. Weaver's representative. And I would ask that ETV stop the video feed during the executive session. Okay, we're back in open session. I can report that we had an executive session, had discussion of personnel matters, and no action was taken. At this time, it is my pleasure to advise that the search committee for new executive director has unanimously submitted the name of Dana Yao to be our full-time executive director. And I would open that up for any discussion. No seconds necessary. But anybody have anything they want to say before we vote on that?
I do.
Yes, please.
I just think it's a wonderful choice. I've heard like rumors that maybe she was not sure about this because of her non-education in the classroom background. However, as the only in the classroom full-time teacher on this committee, I have full confidence in you, and I would gladly share that with anyone.
Yes, and I've worked with Dana she actually came with the EOC in '04. I didn't arrive till '05. So only 18 years we've spent together, but I can tell you that they've been wonderful years, and she's always been helpful. She's very responsive, and she knows her way around this committee and around the legislature, and that's so important in this position. So we're delighted that you are our candidate, and with that, I would ask for
She had applied, and I want to commend the committee. I think the committee, the subcommittee made an excellent choice, and look forward to working with you in your new position.
Thank
All right.
you all. Thank you.
all
for
in
those
favor
kind
of Ms.
words.
Yao as executive director, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Technology works again. Thank you. Congratulations, Dana. We're really excited for you. And there being no further business to come before this committee, thank you all for being here. Give Dana your full support, and we stand adjourned.